Greetings everyone. So in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to work with vectors, and I'm speeding through the entire video here so you can sort of get a quick feel for all the stuff that I'm going to cover, and that way if you already know this stuff or if there's something in particular here that you want to see, you can just skip ahead and find the spot that interests you most. Okay, so the first step of course is to derive a skeleton from the armature pose, and notice the careful attention I paid to the subtle angles in the rib cage and the pelvis. I want to make sure that I leverage this perspective in my drawing and not lose it. So, because I'm just sort of doing this for myself, I'm kind of going from design to finish in one go. This entire piece took 50 minutes to make, and of course when you're your own art director, that's really easy to do because you're not having to follow any direction or hit any particular marks. So I just sort of took that pose and went with it and made sort of a cute, chubby female hero character, and I'm in the process right now of polishing it up, as you can see, and I've kind of reached a finished drawing here. So now I'm going to go in and clean it up with some finer lines so I can make sure I can be very deliberate once I go in with my paths. And because I know I'm going to be doing this in vector, I'm trying to streamline my curves as much as possible. This is really common in cartoony characters. You want to have very nice sloping curves. Try to get rid of as much noise as possible so that when I go in with my vectors, I'm having to do as little guesswork as possible. So there's my finished drawing, and now I'm going to go in with the pen tool and plot out the points. I want to plot out as few points as possible so that I'm relying on the Bezier handles for most of the curvature. This way the shapes that I create are really easy to modify later on. And you can see there how I just sort of went through the shoulder, because I know that later on I can stack these one in front of the other to occlude them, or in this case I'm going to be actually using the clipping mask extensively since I'm in Photoshop right now. I'm using Photoshop CS2, which is a version you can get for free on Adobe's website. So I'm not focusing too much on color. I'm just focusing on shapes. It's almost like you're cutting out pieces of paper and you're laying them out one in front of the other. And once I get through all these shapes, I'll be able to then focus on color, detail, and shading. You can see how in just one swooping curve I got that top part of the arm and the bottom of the arm. So some of the shortcuts I'm using are the letter P for the pen tool, and A for the selection tools, or Shift A for the alternate selection tool. I like to call them shape and component modes. So you can select the entire shape of a path with the black arrow tool if you hit the letter A on the keyboard, or if you hit Shift A, it's going to switch over to a white arrow, which is for selecting individual points. Now, it takes practice to get the hang of this, because often you have to deselect the path and reselect it in order to select a point. And if there's a lot of paths in your scene, Photoshop will think you're trying to select a neighboring path. And so you just have to get in the habit of clicking outside of the canvas every so often so you can start a brand new selection. So here I'm wrapping up most of the shapes, just doing the back of the leg separately so that I can give it a slightly different color, give it a little bit of atmospheric perspective. And now I'm ready to start creating my individual lines. And you'll notice I'm doing something that is probably not very conventional for a lot of vector artists to do. I'm actually drawing my lines as shapes. If you were in a program like Illustrator or Flash, which are intended for vector drawing, they have brush tools that behave like a typical pressure-sensitive brush would behave, but it plots paths. And since Photoshop CS2 doesn't have that feature, I'm drawing the lines as individual shapes. Those rosy cheek shapes are just circles, but notice how the one on the right gets clipped off with the face. And you can see what that looks like in my layer palette on the right. It's sort of slightly stacked on top of the face layer, but it's clipped. There's a little arrow. You can do a clipping mask by stacking two layers together, holding Alt on the keyboard and clicking in that gray line between both layers, and the top one will become clipped by the one beneath it. So I'm just going through and adding all these interior layers, and for the outer layers I'm just using an effect called a stroke. So it's just an even outline around the entire shape, which means that it saves me a lot of time, because then all I have to do is draw the inside lines and not have to worry about the outside lines. So now that things are starting to get more fleshed out, I'm starting to make choices about color, shape color, and line color. And once I'm done with that, I'll be able to do some highlights and shadows. So here I'm doing the highlight, which is essentially a layer of a white shape that is clipped by the costume layer, and it has just a kind of a brighter pink to indicate that the light is hitting her pinkish costume. Sometimes I'll draw a shape for the light source, and sometimes I'll just draw a shape for the shadow. Which way you go is really entirely up to you. Here I ended up doing the face one way, and then I ended up deleting everything I did and just started over and decided to draw the shadow instead of trying to draw the highlight. Now I'm doing a little bit of costume detail, and in order to preserve the shadow work that I did, I'm using a blending mode. In this case I'm using color dodge, and I dropped the fill so that it would brighten the costume but not over brighten the shadows. And all that costuming detail is essentially white with a blending mode clipped over the top of the costume layer and on top of the shadow layer, so that it still preserves the shadows. It's kind of like a see-through layer. Here I'm using a gradient overlay, which can add a lot of dimensionality and depth to your vector art. I added it to the highlight on the hair, but I'm also going to add it to the costume as well. Just having that subtle gradation kind of move away from the light source into the shadowed area adds a lot of depth. And finally, a background, a really simple sort of graphical background just to frame the character and give it additional dimensionality and separation from the frame. So this could potentially be used as an icon. It could be used as an illustration for a cover. The beauty of working in vector is that it's completely resizable, and so you can make it any size you want. So here what I'm doing is I'm copying all the shapes I made into another vector shape that it's entirely black, so that I can create like a shadow. And it's clipped against the circle that's behind her, so that it only shows up inside that circle. And now I'm distorting it using the Control-T for transform shortcut. And that's it. There's the finished piece. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, even if they're technical questions, leave them in the comments, or send me an email at store@digitaldouble.com. And this month we have a contest for vector artists. So we're giving out a free Ranger armature, which costs $190. I make them myself by hand, and also runner-up prizes for 2 or 3 other people. We're going to be giving out a rider and stand, $45 value there. So if you want to enter to the competition, please go to armature9.com. There is a monthly contest button at the very top, and all the details are there, and where you can upload your submission. It's entirely free. You can submit as many entries as you like, and we do these every month, so stay tuned. Every month there's a slightly different theme or a slightly different twist to what's requested, but consistently throughout, the whole point is to take a pose from one of the photos that we've provided and try to derive from it an illustration. So if you have any questions, let me know. I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks, guys. Bye.